L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Prime Minister is again a pyromaniac masquerading as a firefighter, this time on immigration. He blames bad actors for his decisions that destroyed our immigration system. He decided to increase and open the door to 726% more asylum claims. He decided to approve 211% more international students. He decided to lift the ban on temporary foreign workers in communities with already high unemployment. If the Prime Minister is hunting for the quote-unquote bad actors who ruined the system, will he have a look in the mirror?
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think we'll take any lessons from someone who spent the last 20 years lighting fires in the House of Commons. That's it. We put forward a plan 2 weeks ago to reduce immigration levels by 20%. Canadians expect us to be responsible and to react to their needs. That's what we're doing with this plan. The Parliamentary Budget Officer himself has said that this new plan will reduce housing needs by 50%. That's what Canadians want. It's responsible.
Very good.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Employment Minister first denied that he and his company were profiting off government business, and then text messages showed the contrary. They referred to a Randy. Well, he claimed that it was another Randy. We now know there is no other Randy. We know he falsely claimed he was Indigenous in order so that his company could steal resources that were meant for real Indigenous people. And now his company address matches the address of a place that was the location of 2 cocaine busts. Any one of these things would be a resigning offense. Why won't he resign now?
Order. The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, I know the person referred to in today's article. I've never met that person. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. Those are the facts.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Apparently the person he doesn't know is himself. He says that he's not the Randy in the text messages, but his own business associates say there is no other Randy. He says that he said that he was Indigenous in order that he could get grants and contracts that were meant just for Indigenous people. Now he admits he's not Indigenous at all. And now, while his company has the same address as a place that has 2 cocaine busts, he says he doesn't know the person involved in that address either. Does this minister even know who he is?
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, the article states...
And ask all members, please. There's the Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development from the top.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know the person referred to in the article today. I've never met her. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. The article states that fact, and that is the fact.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After the Prime Minister took his private jet, burned 105 tons of jet fuel, and emitted 300 tons of greenhouse gases to go down to Brazil, he claimed that Canadians who are opposed to his carbon tax are just confused by disinformation. No, Canadians aren't stupid, Mr. Speaker. They know that the Parliamentary Budget Officer has calculated that 100% of middle-class Canadians pay more in the tax than they get back. The Prime Minister already also said, though, that this will be the subject of the next election. I couldn't agree more. So why don't we have a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Minister for... Order. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources. And
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, it would be nice if the Leader of the Opposition was not spouting disinformation and misinformation in the House. At the end of the day, 8 out of 10 Canadian families, the vast majority of Canadians, get more money back. It is those that actually live on the most modest incomes that are the best off as a result of the price on pollution. But I would also say it is a price on pollution. It is about addressing climate change, something that organization across the way simply has no idea how to do and does not care.
L'honorable député de La Prairie. The honourable member from Thornhill.
It seems like every time the employment minister finds rock bottom, it keeps getting worse. First, he said he wasn't the Randy involved in his company, but we know there was only one Randy at his company. He said he wasn't involved with his company while in cabinet, and text messages reveal that he is. He said that he was Indigenous to profit from government contracts stealing from First Nations communities, and now there's new news of coordinating business activities with drug smugglers and convicts. This is the behavior of a low-life fraud, not a federal cabinet minister. Simple question. How does that guy still have his job?
Order. Order. The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, despite the innuendo, here are the facts. I don't know the person in question. I never met that person in question. And Mr. Speaker, those are simply the facts. The article even says that I've never met the person in question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Speaker, here are the facts. He flaunts the ethics rules. He claims a false identity. He gets caught in a web of lies. That's what the Prime Minister rewards after 9 years. With each passing day, we find out more about the Employment Minister's scams and schemes, and we learn that he's just a phony and a fraud. Canadians want to know. Indigenous communities who stole from him, who he stole from, want to know. And Liberal backbenchers want to know when the Prime Minister is going to fire that Cabinet Minister.
The Honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know the person in the article from today. I've never met the person in the article from today. Those are the facts. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives may not like it, but it's actually in the article that I don't know the person in question. Never met them.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The Liberal minister from Alberta is a fake and a fraud. He said he was not the Randy involved in his company, but we know that there's only one Randy. He said he wasn't involved in his company at the cabinet table.
I'm going to ask colleagues. Today we've been skating close to the line in terms. Excuse me, colleagues. I will start my comment again if you would give me the privilege of listening. At several occasions today, we've been skating close to the line in terms of what's acceptable language. The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, I think, has skated over that line and accusing a direct member. Can I ask the honourable member to withdraw that comment and start his question from the top, please?
Restart, Speaker, that this Liberal minister from Alberta has been implicated in fraud in media reports. Today, we've seen that. It's very clear.
I'm just going to, I'm not certain if I was having trouble hearing the member. I don't think I heard the withdraw. If you could withdraw and start again, I'd appreciate it. If members were not to take the floor while a member is being recognized, the speaker will be able to hear the member. The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Withdrawing the previous words, Speaker, we'll talk about this Liberal minister from Alberta who has been implicated in media reports in fraud. Some of them he's even apologized for. He misrepresented his identity, claiming to be Indigenous, trying to steal contracts from people who are in fact Indigenous. This same minister said that he wasn't the Randy at his own company. We know that there was only one Randy at that company. It's pandemic profiteering. We know that there's allegations of fraud. Why is it that this Prime Minister just won't fire that minister?
The honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, what the member opposite just said is simply not true.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
It's unbelievable that with the cocaine connections to the Liberal minister from Alberta, that those Liberals, that Prime Minister, want to allow him to continue to be in Cabinet. He said that he was Indigenous to try and steal contracts from individuals who are Indigenous. That's okay as long as you are a Liberal. The company is involved in more than half a dozen lawsuits because of fraud, and that's okay as long as you're a Liberal. They came before committee and said things that we now know weren't true, like it must have been some other Randy. If he won't resign, why won't this Prime Minister fire that fraudster?
Again, members at the very last possible moment used a word which would not be considered acceptable. Can I just ask the honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Island and Rideau Lakes to please withdraw that last word?
I'll withdraw the last word. He should be fired.
I thank the honourable member. The honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, what the member opposite said, once again, is not true.
L'honorable député de Mégantic. The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
The minister from Edmonton is a fake and a phony. He said that he was not the Randy.
I'm going to ask, this is a couple of times that I've asked the honourable members. I'm going to ask the honourable members again to remember when they speak directly to members, they have to be, of course, extend to them all the respect that each member, as members, are deserving of. So I'm going to ask the honourable member, please, to rephrase this question to start from the top.
Mr. Speaker, this minister deserves to be criticized in the People's House, the House of Commons. He said he was not the Randy involved in this company, but we know there's only one Randy at the company. He said he wasn't involved in the operations of the company, but text messages reveal that he is. He said he was Indigenous to profit from government contracts, trying to steal from First Nations communities. When will the Prime Minister fire this phony for making false claims to steal from First Nations?
I'm going to invite all members to be very judicious in terms of their use of their language in this place. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my colleague has addressed this issue and stated that those claims are false. Mr. Speaker, we addressed the fact that that business was never listed as an Indigenous business on the procurement site and in fact received no funding from the Government of Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good answer.
The Honourable Member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
The company did actually receive funding from the Government of Canada. The Minister of Employment's business partner claimed that their company was fully Indigenous owned. How would he have gotten that impression? Maybe because the Liberal Party repeatedly said that the minister was Indigenous. Now, it is possible to get kicked out of the Liberals' Indigenous caucus, not for corruption, but for refusing to participate in corruption, as Jody Wilson-Raybould found out. After 9 years, they've gone from firing the first Indigenous Attorney General to keeping the first fake Indigenous Minister of Employment. When will the Prime Minister fire this phony minister? I'm going to encourage all members to be
to be more judicious in their use of their words and referring directly to other members. The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Services Publics et de l'Approvisionnement.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Notre collègue sait très bien qu'en Chambre...
The Honourable Member from Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's only minister from Alberta is accused of being a fake and a fraud. The member from Edmonton Centre said he wasn't the Randy involved in his company. Yet we know he is the only Randy involved in that company. He said he wasn't involved with his company while in cabinet, yet text messages clearly show that he was. Right. He pretended to be Indigenous to profit from government contracts, effectively stealing from First Nations businesses. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. When will the Prime Minister do his job and fire that minister?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, my colleague has addressed those issues that McCauley raises, and he has clarified that they are false. Mr. Speaker, we have stated that that business was not listed as an Indigenous business, and it did not receive funding through that program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very good.
The Honourable Member, for the Honourable Member from Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, it's clear that this NDP Liberal government isn't worth the cost or the corruption. Now we have a Minister of Employment who says he sees nothing, he hears nothing, he knows nothing, but there's too much here to pass up. First, he claimed he wasn't the other Randy implicated in his business partner's text messages. We now know that he was. Then he claimed that he had no active role in his company's operations while he served in cabinet. We now know that he did. And we now know that he claimed Indigenous heritage and status, and it was a complete fabrication. These attempts to steal funds earmarked for Indigenous companies is fraudulent. When will be enough for this Prime Minister? When will he fire this minister?
The Honourable Minister for Public Works and Procurement.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Deux premières choses.
The Honourable Member from Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this minister keeps explaining himself, but the answers aren't coming. The minister's facing multiple scandals. We know that his company has been charged with fraud. We know that he was illegally involved while he served in cabinet. We know that the minister for years claimed that he had Indigenous heritage, and we now know that's a complete fabrication. And today we learned that the minister's company shared a post office box with a known international cocaine dealer. At best, the minister has shown abhorrent judgment, and at worst, he is completely corrupt. The fact that this Prime Minister continues to have confidence in him demonstrates exactly why he's not fit to lead this country. When will this Prime Minister fire this minister?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague has stated that those are all false, and he did not know this person in question. But if you want to talk about fit for leadership, you should be asking his own leader why he has not yet gotten a security clearance. Because if that's someone who wants to lead the country, they should probably know what risks are facing Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are wondering why the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada has not gotten a security clearance. Thank you.
Yes, they are wondering that.
The Honourable Member from Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. The Prime Minister is jetting around the globe promoting his failed carbon tax while Canadians line up at the food banks. According to the Prime Minister, the carbon tax is, quote, the best tool out there, and anyone who disagrees is using, quote, propaganda. But Canada's Environment Commissioner disagrees. He revealed the Liberals will not meet their own emission targets despite quadrupling the carbon tax.
That's right.
It's all pain and no gain. So will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
Good question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's disingenuous for the Conservatives to continually link the food bank situation in Canada with carbon pricing. There's a 108-page report that they produced. The Food Banks Canada came forward and made 4 recommendations around Canada's social safety net. And not once in that 108-page report did they mention the carbon tax or carbon pricing, because they know that Canada's carbon rebate that comes out 4 times a year supports Canadians, particularly lower and middle-income Canadians, Mr. Speaker. They should cut out the misinformation and stop being so disingenuous, particularly on the backs of lower-income Canadians.
The honourable member from Battlefords, Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. Now, the Prime Minister got on his taxpayer-funded carbon-emitting jet, flew to Brazil, and bragged about how great his punitive carbon tax is. His carbon tax has done nothing for the environment while literally making life's basic necessities unaffordable. The Prime Minister called it the best tool out there, but the only tool that Canadians want is a ballot box. Will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada's emissions are lower now than they've been since all of Connor McDavid's life. Last time they were this low was 1997. Our emissions are down because of industrial carbon pricing, because of pricing on consumer fuels, and because of the over 100 measures that this government has undertaken to lower our emissions and protect the environment. And what have the Conservatives done over that same time? They voted against every single measure, Mr. Speaker. It's not just us that think carbon pricing is effective, it's also William Nordhaus, who has a Nobel Prize to prove it. So if even one Conservative economist, if they could find one that said they've got a solution for fighting climate change, we'd love to hear it.
Absolutely.
The honourable member from Battlefords, Lloydminster.
Under this Prime Minister's carbon tax regime, grocery prices have skyrocketed to the point that scurvy is now a serious health concern in Canada. 27 cases of scurvy have been identified in northern Saskatchewan. The Prime Minister wants to blame, quote, propaganda, misinformation, and flat-out lies for opposition to his carbon tax. But unlike him, Canadians do not get to turn a blind eye to the affordability challenges that they face. Will the Prime Minister show some compassion and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Canada is second in the G7 on health span, second only to Japan. We're 1 year longer than both France and Italy in terms of the number of years we live in good health. We are 2 years better than the United Kingdom. We are 6 years longer than the United States. You know, when you're talking about things that have been gone for a long time, let's talk about what's happening with measles. Let's talk about what's happening with misinformation generally. The approach to attacking public health that the Conservatives are taking, the attack on information, puts lives at risk and fundamentally endangers our health system, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Toronto St. Paul's.
Fact. This Liberal Prime Minister is out of touch. First, he gets on a gas-guzzling jet. Then, he glorifies the punishing carbon tax that Canadians pay. And everyone who disagrees, he says, quote, they're using propaganda, misinformation, and flat-out lies. Meanwhile, more than 1 in 10 people in Toronto are using food banks, and 87% of them are living in unaffordable housing. Enough is enough. Why won't the Prime Minister treat Canadians like adults, let them decide, and call a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a fact that 300 economists in this country have all said that a price on pollution is an effective way to reduce emissions, and the majority of Canadians actually get more money back in rebates. It is a fact that the Parliamentary Budget Officer said exactly the same thing. On this side of the House, we have a plan that is about addressing affordability issues, it is about growing a clean economy for the future, and it is about fighting climate change. My goodness, it is time that some of those folks across the way at least accept the reality of climate change and have something positive to say.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost of housing. The failing Liberal housing plan is not building more homes. Housing starts are down last month compared to 2023. 11% in Canada, 30% in BC, and 87% in Kelowna. I've talked to home builders and residents in my community who all support the common sense Conservative plan to axe the GST on new homes sold under $1 million. Will the NDP Liberals agree with home builders and families and axe the GST on new homes sold?
The The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
I am very happy to correct the record that my Conservative colleague has put on the floor of the House of Commons. Housing starts are actually up this month 8% compared to last month, and year over year are trending in a positive direction, near the all-time record home building pace that Canada has ever seen. Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that this question would come from this particular member who represents the city of Kelowna, which received $31.5 million to build thousands and thousands of more homes. Not only is she opposed to that investment, her leader is barring her and every one of her colleagues from advocating on behalf of their communities. I came here to represent my community in Ottawa, not to take my leader's words back home.
The Honourable Member from Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Police associations nationwide are demanding urgent bail legislation to keep our communities safe. Yet just this morning, a stolen BMW crashed into a Toronto bus, injuring 9 people, 2 critically. 2 of the 4 accused were, surprise, surprise, out on bail, including 1 for a violent robbery. If the safety and security of Canadians is no longer a priority for this Prime Minister, will he call an immediate election so that Conservatives can bring jail, not bail, for repeat violent offenders?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the incident this morning in Toronto is a concern for all of us in this House, all of us who believe in prioritizing public safety and community safety. What's concerning and what people need to understand is that calls for bail reform echoed in this chamber 18 months ago. We responded, tabled legislation, and with the cooperation of all parties, we got it passed. Now the ball goes to the province's court. What we need to ensure is that that very person who should have been detained, did the Crown contest that bail? Did the Crown decide to appeal the bail if the bail decision was made in error? Was there enough space in detention facilities run by the province to hold that person in detention? These are important questions. We need answers.
Going to invite the Honourable Member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, please to not take the question or not take the floor unless is recognised by the Speaker. I see that the Honourable Minister is rising on a point of order. The Honourable Minister for International Development.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes, at the conclusion of asking his question, as he was sitting down, called the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development Cocaine Randy. That is extremely unparliamentary, and I ask you, Mr. Speaker, to ask him to withdraw that remark. Thank you very much.
I see that the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes is rising in response to this point of order.
Speaker, I'm sure that I was referring to the other Randy as Cocaine Randy.
I will come back to this House after some further reflection. I see that the Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona is rising on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm deeply concerned. So you raised the issue of me wearing a pin in the House of Commons. I have to tell you that I stand here proudly wearing the pin that stands in solidarity with the Palestinian people, but people within this place are wearing pins for a various number of reasons. One of my colleagues is proudly wearing the moose hide pin to show his support for the causes that are important. You know, people wear poppies within this House. I have many times worn a flag for the Ukraine Canadian to support.
Order. I'd like honourable members. Honourable members, it's important for the chair to be able to hear the point that is raised by the honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona. I couldn't hear much after the reference to the poppy. I'm going to give the honourable member another 10 seconds just to wrap up after, so that the chair can hear this in order to make a proper determination. The honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona.
I'd like to point out, when I cannot, as a member of the House of Commons, bring up a point of order without being heckled and shouted down by the Conservatives, that imposes as well on my privilege. Now, I proudly... Mr. Speaker, I have proudly worn many pins in this House. For example, tomorrow, to mark 1,000 days since Putin invaded Ukraine, I will wear the Ukrainian pin. I need to know whether the Conservatives will call this out as a prop.
Here, here. Here, here. I see that the honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to follow up on the point of order raised about pins that members wear in the House. In the past, different positions have been taken with respect.
So I see that the honourable member is trying to make a point that was raised earlier. I did indicate to the House that I had heard points on this, and I will come back to the House if necessary on this matter.
So Heather gets to make points